I pressed harder on the gas pedal, watching the speedometer needle creep past 60 miles an hour. The winding mountain road ahead was nearly swallowed by the curtain of white rain, hammering against the windshield, faster than the wipers could keep up. I had been driving for 40 minutes, leaving behind the farm on the west side of McMinnville, where I had just spent 6 hours photographing a restored barn for a small architectural magazine that paid barely enough to fill the gas tank. 28 years old, still clinging to the fragile rhythm of freelance work. If my parents were alive, they would have had plenty to say about that. It had been 3 years since they were gone, yet sometimes my hand still reached for the phone before I remembered there was no one left to call. Headlights flared in the rearview mirror. The beam sliced through the heavy rain, glaring into my eyes like a warning. That car had been following me for at least 15 miles, keeping the same relentless distance. Even though there was no reason for 2 cars to be traveling this same lonely stretch of forest road at 11 o'clock at night in Oregon, I slowed to 45 miles an hour. The car slowed too. I pushed up to 65. It matched me, unwavering. A chill spread through my chest, not from the rain outside, but from something deeper, instinctive, the same unease that had crawled up my spine during chaotic protests or sudden police raids, when survival instincts drowned out all reason. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The leather felt slick with sweat, even as the November air seeped coldly through the cracks in the doors. I told myself it was a coincidence, just someone else heading home to Portland, maybe living east of these woods, but my heart refused to listen. The old bridge over the Trask River loomed in the dark ahead. 2 narrow lanes, slick as ice beneath the mix of rain and fallen leaves covering the steel surface. I had crossed that bridge hundreds of times. Yet tonight, under the pounding rain and the glare slicing through my rearview mirror, everything felt strange, menacing. I entered the curve too fast. The instant the tires lost traction, I knew I had made a mistake. The car skidded sideways. I jerked the wheel to the right, desperate to steady it. Mistake number 2. The world spun, a blur of motion and panic, metal shrieking as my car slammed against the bridge rail. Then suddenly there was nothing beneath me, only emptiness and the fall. Between that moment when the car broke free of the bridge and the moment the young woman was pulled from the freezing river by a stranger whose coat bore 2 stitched letters, D.C. If your heartbeat quickened in that suffocating breath, subscribe to our channel. Hit like and share so you won't miss the stories filled with suspense and emotion we bring you every day. And before moving on to the next part where she'll learn who that man was and why he appeared at the edge of life and death, tell us where you're watching this video from. Comment your city or country below so we'll know how far this story has reached across the world. We can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments. The impact with the water was so violent that my whole body felt crushed. The seatbelt locked. My head snapped forward, pain bursting behind my forehead like a splitting flash. Water poured in through the door seams almost instantly, so cold it stole the breath from my lungs. I struggled, fumbling with numb fingers to release the seatbelt, feeling as if my hands no longer belonged to me. My camera bag flew from the passenger seat, slammed into my leg, and jammed between the pedals and my right calf, pinning me in place. The car's nose dipped downward. The water climbed from my waist to my chest within seconds, the cold cutting through me until my heart pounded wildly. I gritted my teeth, biting my lip to stay conscious, pushing the camera bag away with my left hand as my ribs cracked with a sharp, searing sound. The buckle clicked free. I exhaled, but there was no time to celebrate. I yanked the door handle. It didn't budge. Tried again, throwing my shoulder into it, but the pressure from outside held it shut, like the lid of a coffin sealed tight. The water reached my chin. I craned my neck back, gasping for air, fumbling for the window switch. Nothing. Of course not, the power was dead. No way out. My final breath was short and frantic before the water surged into my nose, my mouth, crushing my chest until I thought I would explode from within. I kicked, punched, thrashed wildly in the dark. Everything beyond the car was pitch black. I couldn't tell which way was up or down, whether I had sunk to the riverbed or was still drifting mid-current. The burning in my lungs spread, every cell screaming for oxygen. I didn't want to die. Not like this. Not trapped in a sinking car in a freezing river. Not when there was still so much left undone. But I was losing. My consciousness began to fade. Black dots spilled across my vision. My hands grew weak. Then suddenly a crack like thunder underwater. The side window burst open. A hand reached through, gripping me, hauling me out of the seat as if I weighed nothing. Shards of glass tore through my jacket and skin, stinging, but I didn't care. I was being pulled upward, carried somewhere. I couldn't tell if I was helping or just a limp weight in his grasp. We broke the surface, the cold air knifing into my lungs. I coughed violently, choking, vomiting water, trying to draw in a breath but managing only ragged gasps, as though my lungs were betraying me. A strong arm cradled my head above water. A deep, rough voice spoke close to my ear, steady, real. "I've got you. Don't fight. Just breathe." I couldn't fight. My body was limp, trembling in shock. He swam toward the shore with one arm keeping me afloat, his legs kicking in measured rhythm. Near the muddy river bank, he lifted me effortlessly, laying me on my back on the damp ground. His face came into view beneath the dim glow and swirling storm clouds above tall, broad-shouldered, black hair plastered to his forehead, blood running down from a gash at his temple. Blood and rain mixed, dripping onto his dark shirt. "An ambulance is coming," he said, running his hands along my ribs to check for injuries. When he pressed the right side, I groaned in pain. He muttered something, maybe an apology, then shrugged off his coat and draped it over me. It was heavy, warm, expensive. "Who?" I rasped, my voice raw like sandpaper. "Doesn't matter." He rose to his feet, water streaming off him into the mud. In the flickering light of the approaching rescue truck, I saw him more clearly, at least 6 feet tall, solid, his eyes cutting through the darkness. On the coat he'd left behind, I caught the faint glimmer of gold embroidery along the collar. "D.C. You're safe now," he said softly, then stepped back into the shadows of the trees. I tried to push myself up, but my body gave way. I didn't know his name, but he had saved my life. And now, he was gone as if he had never existed at all. I woke to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the steady beeping of a monitor to my right. The ceiling above me was stark white, the dim fluorescent light flickering faintly, forcing my eyes to blink several times before they adjusted. My throat was dry and raw, my body aching as though I'd been crushed beneath a truck. But I was alive. No more water, no more darkness, no more choking beneath the freezing river. Only the sound of my own heartbeat and the heavy pressure along my right side, where every rib seemed to scream in protest with each shallow breath. Turning my head, I saw a small bouquet of flowers and a neatly folded coat on the chair beside the bed. His coat, the same one, the letters D, C, still shimmered faintly on the collar, golden thread catching the hospital light. I closed my eyes, waiting for the dizziness to settle. His face surfaced in my memory like a fragmented image that refused to fade the deep eyes, the warm hand that had pulled me back from death, then disappeared without a word of explanation. The door opened with a soft click. A nurse in scrubs entered, followed by a man in a brown leather jacket, a police badge clipped to his belt. The nurse checked the machines with gentle efficiency, while the man stood by my bed, hands in his pockets, voice hoarse with fatigue. "Miss Hart, I'm Lieutenant Tom Sanchez from Yamhill County Police Department. We need to ask you a few questions. If you're feeling up to it." I gave a faint nod. He glanced at his notepad, then met my eyes, his expression grave. "Your car showed signs of tampering. The brakes were cut." The words didn't make sense at first. My brow furrowed as my mind struggled to piece them together with what had happened. "Not an accident. Someone had wanted me dead," the officer went on, watching me carefully. "Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm you?" I shook my head. I was a freelance photographer, barely connected enough to anyone to make enemies. Unless... I swallowed hard, remembering the fundraising gala last week at the Sentinel Hotel. The photos I hadn't yet processed. The faces in the shadows I'd caught by chance. My eyes drifted toward the coat. The man who saved me knew something. He hadn't shown up by coincidence. And if he'd been following me before the car went off the bridge, maybe he wasn't just a rescuer. Maybe he'd known everything from the start. I left the hospital on Tuesday morning, 4 days after the crash, with a fractured rib, a scattering of long bruises down my arms, and a list of painkillers as long as my remaining strength. No one had been caught. The police said they were investigating, but there were few leads, no cameras, no witnesses, nothing except a drowned car and a single clean slice across the brake line. I returned to my small third-floor apartment in an old Portland building, where the sound of freight trains rumbled every few hours through the night. I didn't turn on the lights. I simply sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, leaning against the bookshelf, daylight filtering weakly through the fogged window and pooling around the camera case on the floor. I had brought it with me to Yamhill but hadn't yet transferred the photos from the memory card. The pictures from last week's gala, though, were still untouched on my hard drive. I pulled out my laptop, plugged in the external drive, and opened the folder labeled only by date and event. Fundraiser Sentinel Hotel, November 11th. More than 300 photos, mostly guests, shaking hands, smiling for the camera, sipping wine under the soft amber light. I clicked through rows of practiced smiles, glittering dresses, and politician-style handshakes until I stopped. One picture felt wrong, not technically, but viscerally. It showed a back hallway behind the ballroom, a moment I had captured while moving between shots. 3 men stood close together, heads bent low. One was holding something that looked like a heavy cloth bag, another clutching a black briefcase. Their faces were partially obscured by the wall lamp's shadows and the camera angle, but I recognized the man in the center. It was him, the man who had pulled me from the sinking car. There was no mistake: the profile, the gaze, the faint scar along his left jawline. I zoomed in. A gloved hand was passing the bag to the man on the right, while the third held the briefcase as if preparing to open it. No police, no security. A secret exchange at a charity gala crowded with businessmen, politicians, and journalists. I opened the next few frames. In the far right corner stood another man, near a pillar, watching. He didn't take part. In the following shots, I saw him lift his phone, recording or photographing the scene. I remembered him clearly now. He had been near the refreshment table when I stopped for water. I hadn't seen him before at any event, but since then, his face had surfaced twice more in my memory. Once in the parking lot when I left the farm, and again at the cafe where I waited for the bus back to Portland. I hadn't noticed then, but he had always been there, far enough not to raise suspicion, yet close enough to stay within sight. I opened the final image from the gala, taken from a second-floor window overlooking the street. A black SUV was parked across the road, the rear window slightly lowered. Someone sat inside, their face hidden by shadow. Still, the silhouette looked like him. My throat tightened. He wasn't just my savior. He had been at the scene where I almost died. He had been there before, when I took those photos, and he was tied to a secret transaction I had accidentally captured. If these photos were the reason someone wanted me dead, then maybe I hadn't been rescued by chance. Maybe he knew it would happen and still decided to pull me from the river. But why? I didn't sleep at all that night. The photographs kept looping in my head, each frame freezing at the exact moment no one ever wants to remember. I had captured something I was never meant to see, and now I understood why someone had cut my brakes. I had brushed against something far bigger and more dangerous than myself, a world I didn't belong to. By dawn, when the streetlights began slipping through the blinds, I collapsed onto the sofa, still in my sweater and jeans. I didn't remember when I drifted off. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes, the silence was gone. There was a faint sound at the door, a soft click of the hinges, too controlled, too deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how to enter without being heard. My chest tightened. I shot upright, heart pounding in my ribs, reaching for my phone on the table. But before my fingers touched it, the door swung open. He stepped in, no warning, no knock, no permission. Dominic Callahan stood there, in my living room, his eyes burning like fire, his hair damp and tousled as if he had just walked through a storm. I froze not from fear, but disbelief. He was really here, in my apartment, as though the fragments of last night's dream had slipped into reality. He wore a long black wool coat that brushed his knees, the shirt beneath slightly wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, stubble tracing his jaw. He stared at me without blinking, as if measuring each of my breaths. I stood up, legs trembling. "How did you get in?" My voice rasped, dry. The door was locked. Dominic didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object, and tossed it onto the table, a keycard. "You should change your locks," he said quietly. "I got that the night I pulled you out." I didn't know what to say. Why was he here? To threaten me? To kill me? Or simply to make sure I was still alive? Dominic took a step closer, stopping just short of arm's reach, enough for me to see the flicker of light in his eyes. "You've looked at the photos, haven't you?" he asked. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. He already knew. His gaze swept the room, landing on the open laptop. The photograph of him and the 2 men in the hotel corridor still glowed on the screen. I expected anger. Instead, he exhaled, almost as if relief outweighed concern. "You're in danger, Emily." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "From who?" I asked, barely audible, my voice trembling. "From the people who see you as a threat," he said. "You photographed something you weren't supposed to. Someone gave the order to have you killed." I stared at him, stunned. "You knew?" Dominic nodded. "I wasn't going to let it happen. I followed you for days before the crash. When I saw your car being tailed, I moved in, but it was too late to stop it. I had to go into the river to pull you out." I stepped back until the wall pressed cold against me. "Why do you care? Why save me? I'm nothing to you." He was silent for a long moment, then took a small step forward, his voice lower, steadier. "Because you didn't deserve to die over a photograph, and because I saw you before that night. At the gala. You weren't like the others. I wanted to protect you even knowing it would make everything far more complicated." I stared at him, unable to tell whether what I felt was fear, confusion, or something deeper and more elusive. Dominic turned toward the window. "They've already seen me come in," he said. "You can't stay here. They'll be here soon. Come with me. I'll keep you safe." He said it like a command, but it sounded like an offer a hand extended through the chaos. And even though I didn't fully understand, that hand felt like the only thing still tethering me to the world. I looked at it, hovering between us, and time seemed to slow, stretching thin in the space of one breath. Questions raced through my mind, tangled in instinct and terror, in doubt and something dangerously close to trust. I knew nothing about him except that he had saved me. But I also knew he wasn't ordinary. Dominic Callahan wasn't a stranger who had stumbled into my life by chance and vanished into the dark. He had been there before, had known someone wanted me dead, had followed me, and now he stood in my apartment telling me I couldn't stay, that I needed to go with him. I pulled my hand back, retreating a step. "Why should I trust you? You could be part of this. You could be leading me into another trap." Dominic didn't flinch. He sat down slowly in the chair across from me, arms folded, eyes unwavering. "I understand your doubt. I'd feel the same if our places were reversed. But if I wanted to hurt you, I could have done it 4 days ago. When you were unconscious, I could have made you disappear. No one would know, no one would look, but I didn't, because I'm not one of them. I'm on your side, on the side that wants you alive." He said it not as a threat, but as a simple fact. "You don't understand what you've stepped into, Emily. What you captured in that photo wasn't just a shady deal. It's a link in a chain that's been running for decades, between people and organizations you can't imagine. I'm part of it, but not in the way you think. I've spent years trying to keep a fragile balance between chaos and control. And you just tipped that balance." My stomach tightened, every word striking the fragile ground beneath me. "I don't want to be part of any of this," I said. "I'm just a photographer. I don't belong in your world." Dominic nodded, voice calm, measured. "I know, but they don't care who you are. All they know is that you're a threat. As long as you're free, as long as those photos exist, you'll be hunted. You need to disappear at least for a while." I shook my head, the room spinning. "I can't just walk away from my life, my work, my friends, my name." "If you stay," he interrupted quietly, "there won't be a life to come back to." His words hung in the air, cold and unyielding. "I'll take you somewhere safe. No signals, no cameras, no one who can find you. I promise they won't touch you." I stood frozen. The rational part of me screamed not to trust a man who stepped out of the shadows carrying secrets bigger than anything I'd ever known. But the other part, the part still trembling from fear, from the memory of cold water and the eyes of the man who'd followed me, knew he was right. I was being hunted. And Dominic was the only one who had chosen to pull me from the river instead of letting me drown. I didn't speak. I only nodded. Dominic rose to his feet, nodding once in return, as if that was all he needed. "Then we leave now," he said, "before they get here." It was nearly dawn when we left the city behind. The road ahead was swallowed in darkness, the headlights cutting a narrow ribbon of light across the slick asphalt. Dominic drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, unwavering. I sat beside him, wrapped in the coat he had given me, my body heavy with exhaustion but too tense to close my eyes. Each time a shadow of a tree flickered past the window, my heart clenched on instinct. I didn't know where we were going, only that Dominic had turned onto an unmarked dirt road leading deep into the western forests of Tillamook, where my phone had lost signal nearly 30 minutes earlier. The rain had stopped, but fog hung thick over the trees and the ground, a pale, ghostly mist that made it feel as though we were driving through a dream. At last, the car stopped before a tall iron gate, surrounded by high steel fencing. Dominic lowered his window and held a card to the scanner. The gate opened smoothly, almost soundlessly. As we drove in, I lifted my gaze toward the slope ahead. The house emerged through the fog like something that didn't belong to this place or even this century. It was a European-style mansion built of gray stone, with wide glass windows and steep, dark roofs, every detail whispering of power and quiet restraint. Rows of pine trees lined the driveway like sentinels. Dominic parked at the front steps and turned to me for the first time in hours. "We're here." I stepped out, my legs stiff from sitting too long. The air was colder here, the kind of cold that seeped into the skin, yet so clean it almost burned. A tall man in a leather jacket, moving with the precision of a soldier, came out from the front door. He nodded to Dominic without a word, opened the door, and motioned for us to follow. I didn't know what to expect, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I stopped short. The interior was unlike anything I had ever seen. A high ceiling with a crystal chandelier casting soft amber light, dark polished wood floors gleaming underfoot, furniture chosen with meticulous care, leather armchairs, hand-carved bookshelves, each piece both beautiful and intimidating. There were no family photos, no flowers, no decorations. Everything was perfect and utterly cold. Dominic's voice came from behind me, low and calm. "This is the safest place I have. No signal, no cameras. No one but me knows you're here." I nodded silently. He led me upstairs, down a long carpeted hall, stopping before a heavy wooden door. "This room is yours. The bathroom's inside. If you need anything, ask Vincent." I glanced down the hall. Vincent, the man from before, stood motionless like a shadow. Dominic rested his hand on the doorknob, hesitating. "I know this is more than anyone should be asked to handle," he said softly, "but I promise you I won't let anything happen to you." His voice had changed gentler, raw in a way that startled me. When I looked up, I saw not just control and distance in his eyes, but exhaustion, like someone who had carried too much for too long. I gave a small nod and stepped inside. The door closed with a quiet click behind me. Alone in the unfamiliar stillness, I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing a hand to my chest just to feel my heartbeat. I didn't know whether this was a sanctuary or a carefully disguised prison, whether Dominic was a savior or the guide leading me toward a deeper abyss. But one thing was certain: nothing in my life would ever be the same after the night my car plunged into the river. That door, now shut behind me, was also the first to open into a life I had never imagined entering. It took me nearly 2 days to adjust to the silence so profound it bordered on surreal. No cars, no city noise, no phone notifications, only the rustle of wind through the pines, the distant calls of birds, and Vincent's quiet footsteps every morning as he left a tray of tea outside my door. Dominic didn't force me to come out, but he didn't vanish either. Each morning, I heard faint sounds from the kitchen below the clatter of pans, the rich scent of roasted coffee, sometimes the warmth of buttered toast drifting through the air. On the third morning, I left my room for the first time. I walked barefoot down the carpeted hall, each step cautious, as if afraid to break the fragile stillness that held the house together. Dominic stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, slicing red onions slowly, almost meditatively, as though the act itself steadied him. When he noticed me, he didn't seem surprised. He simply asked if I liked baked eggs with cheese and herbs. I nodded, and he went on cooking as though it were something he did every day for someone, not for a woman who had nearly died days earlier. We ate breakfast in silence. Now and then our eyes met, and both of us looked away too quickly. There was something strange about the way he moved, quiet but assured, unforced yet deliberate. He didn't speak much, but when he did, every word seemed to matter. When I asked why he knew how to cook, Dominic gave a faint smile. "I lived alone for nearly 10 years in Italy," he said. "Not knowing how to cook there is practically a crime." I laughed for the first time since the crash. The sound felt foreign, startling even to me. That evening, we sat together in the mansion's library. He poured wine, put on Beethoven's 7th Symphony, and told me about hearing it for the first time in a small church in Prague when he was 20. I told him about the first time I ever held a camera capturing my mother's shadow stretching across the tiled floor one June afternoon. Dominic listened without interrupting, his eyes softening with each detail I shared. Slowly, I began to see what lay beneath the surface of his reserve, a soul the outside world had never been allowed to see. He loved classical art, could recite long passages from Rainer Maria Rilke, and kept a small collection of wartime love letters preserved in a wooden box tucked in the corner of the library. I never asked why he kept them, but he once said something that lingered in my mind long after. "Some things we keep," he said, "not to remember but to remind ourselves that once we had a heart." The days that followed passed quietly, unhurried. Dominic never asked about the photos, the police, or what I planned to do next. He simply existed, one careful gesture at a time, as though waiting for me to be ready to speak. And I realized I was waiting for him to open up too. In that secluded house buried deep in the woods, between two people carrying their own shadows, a fragile thread began to form. Not full trust, but something close enough to let me breathe without fear. And on the morning Dominic poured my coffee without asking how I took it, I knew he had begun to see me not with calculation but with something far deeper. I didn't want to stay caged forever within 4 beautiful walls, no matter how safe they felt. So that morning I told Dominic I wanted to go down to the nearest town to buy a few personal things. He was silent for several seconds, his gaze unreadable, then finally nodded. He drove me in a silver SUV, an ordinary car that could vanish into the blur of traffic. The town was about 30 minutes from the mansion, small and old-fashioned, its main street lined with narrow shopfronts, and a cozy cafe called Pine and Steam, with wide glass windows looking out onto the road. Dominic parked in a shadowed corner, handed me an old flip phone, and told me to use it only for emergencies. He said he'd let me go alone, but he'd always be close. I nodded. I needed space. I needed to feel human again, even if only for an hour. At first, everything felt normal. I bought toothpaste, a few magazines from a small convenience store, then stopped at Pine and Steam, ordered a latte, and took a seat by the window. The air smelled of pastries and cinnamon. Music floated softly from a speaker above, and for a moment, I almost believed in peace again. Then the unease began quiet, sharp, like a needle slipping under the skin. At first, I thought it was just nerves, but when I stood up to grab more sugar, I saw him. The man in the brown jacket and baseball cap, sitting 3 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper, eyes tracking me through the mirror behind the bar. I knew him instantly. He was the one who had stood near the pillar in that hallway photo, the same one who'd followed me outside the cafe days before the crash. He had no reason to be here. My pulse spiked. I grabbed my coffee and walked quickly out of the cafe, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the street. I turned down a narrow side street, trying to keep my breathing even, though panic had already started to claw its way up my throat. The phone was in my pocket. I flipped it open, but before I could press Dominic's number, a black car glided silently up behind me. The window slid down. No one spoke. I saw only a pair of cold, expressionless eyes from the driver's seat, watching me as if weighing whether to force me inside. I backed away, hands shaking, the world narrowing to the sound of my heartbeat. Then another engine roared. Dominic's silver SUV pulled up fast beside me. The door flung open. "Get in." His voice was low, steady, too calm, yet commanding enough to cut through everything. I dove into the passenger seat, and the door slammed shut behind me. Dominic turned the car sharply, speeding past the black sedan like a gust of cold wind. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the man still sitting there, unfazed, his face blank, as if being recognized didn't bother him at all. Dominic didn't speak the entire drive back, but his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. When we reached the mansion, he parked abruptly and turned to me, eyes burning with anger but not at me. "They've found you," he said. "They didn't believe you survived, but now they know for sure." I lowered my head, a chill spreading through my chest. "I just wanted 1 hour of normal," I whispered. Dominic exhaled slowly, his voice softening. "I understand. But from now on, not a single step alone. You're a target, Emily, and they won't stop." I didn't argue. He was right. There was no room left for weakness or fragile moments of freedom. All I had now was Dominic. That night, when the house was steeped in silence and only the fireplace crackled softly, I sat, curled on the sofa under a wool blanket, eyes fixed on the open laptop before me. Dominic stood a few steps away, a glass of red wine in his hand, watching me quietly but not intruding. I had gone through all the photographs at least 3 times, not as a photographer anymore, but as someone searching for hidden truths buried in the smallest details. I knew now that I had captured something real, something powerful enough to make people want me erased. But looking wasn't enough. I lifted my gaze toward Dominic, forcing my voice to stay calm. I think we need to start here, with these photos. He didn't respond at first. He took a slow sip of wine, eyes reflecting the firelight, then turned to me. What do you mean? You saw what I did, hundreds of frames, different angles, expressions. If we analyze them carefully, we might be able to identify every person in that hallway shot, find out who was dealing with whom, maybe even trace who sent the man following me. Dominic said nothing, so I kept going. I don't have counterintelligence skills. I don't have contacts in their system. But I have images, and images don't lie. If we piece them together, create a visual map of everyone at that event, maybe we'll find something they didn't think I was smart enough to see. 18. Dominic set his glass down slowly. Emily, you don't understand what you're inviting in. The men in those photos aren't ordinary businessmen or politicians. One of them works with international intelligence. Another is the financial arm of a border cartel. What you call clues? To them, it's a death sentence. The deeper you dig, the faster they'll come for you. I believed him. There was no exaggeration in his tone, but that only made me more certain. I can't just hide here, waiting for them to find us, I said. Every time I close my eyes, I feel their shadows creeping closer. I'm tired of being afraid. Dominic's jaw tensed, his fists tightened before he exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a moment like he was fighting something inside himself. Then he sat beside me. Suppose we do it your way, he said quietly. Where do you start? I opened another folder, scrolling through portraits, faces from the gala, frozen mid-smile. Here, I said, pointing. The man with glasses beside the senator, he turned his face away in 5 separate shots. I ran his image through open-source recognition tools. There's an 80% match with a former donor to a charity that vanished from public records 2 years ago. Dominic leaned in, his eyes narrowing. How did you trace that? I picked up some image tracking techniques when I worked with an independent investigative group, I said. Not expert level, but enough to follow a thread. He fell silent again, the silence of someone who had lived too long in a world where control was the only currency. But his expression shifted. Something subtle flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, caution, and then, unexpectedly, trust. Then let's begin, he said softly, but with conviction. And in that moment, I knew I had cracked through a layer of ice around him. Dominic Callahan might not fear death, but he feared losing control. And tonight, for the first time, he had placed a piece of that control and of himself into my hands. We began with the smallest details. Every photograph was enlarged, tagged, arranged by time and position within the event. Dominic turned his library into a makeshift analysis room. The lights dimmed to spare our eyes. The walls covered in notes, printed photos, and red thread connections that made the space look like a scene from a crime drama. He never let me work alone. Dominic saw patterns differently strategically. He understood how people concealed information, how they positioned themselves to stay out of frame, how they moved when they were hiding something. Each night, when I thought I'd reached my limit, he handed me a cup of hot tea, put on soft classical music, and told me to rest for 10 minutes. Then he'd sit beside me again, continuing a new hypothesis as though the exhaustion in his voice didn't exist. Within 5 days, we had identified 4 men from the hallway photo. One was a former legal aide from New Mexico who had vanished from public life after a financial scandal that never went to trial. The second was a businessman linked to 3 shuttered charities under investigation for money laundering. The third, the man standing closest to Dominic that night, was an arms broker with sealed records after his arrest in Colombia. The fourth was the most critical connection, a strategic decoy, as Dominic called him, the kind of operative used to distract investigators from the true deal. Dominic never said how he knew all of this, and I never asked. I trusted him. On the 6th day, he activated an encrypted device and called an old contact. I didn't know who was on the other end, only that his tone changed lower, harder as he relayed the information, emphasizing facts in a language layered with code and tension. When he hung up, he gave me a brief nod. They'll take care of it. 24 hours later, the FBI conducted 3 simultaneous raids in 3 cities, all based on the photographic data I'd provided. What I had seen through my lens became part of something far larger than I had ever imagined. News outlets began reporting, but every story was tightly controlled. Anonymous sources whispered about the sudden collapse of a hidden financial network, but no one mentioned my name. No one knew it all began with a single photo. Dominic made sure of that, but we both knew silence never lasted long. 3 days after the raids, the mansion's security system detected its first signal interference since I'd arrived. Vincent found fresh footprints near the western fence. Dominic changed every access code and began carrying a weapon inside the house. His movements grew sharper, more deliberate. When I asked if the cartel had discovered our trail, he only nodded. "They won't let it go," he said. "They don't need proof to act, just suspicion." That night, I heard the first gunshot. Not from inside the house, but somewhere in the woods. A single, echoing crack that rolled through the trees. Dominic told me not to leave my room. He and Vincent swept the grounds. They found no one. Only a bullet lodged in a tree by the fence, the metal still warm. No note. No demand. No warning. Just a message. "We know where you are." When Dominic came back, the dark fabric of his clothes was damp with forest dew, and the softness I'd once seen in his eyes was gone. He sat across from me, laid his gun on the table, and kept his hand resting on the grip. "We can't wait any longer," he said quietly. "If we don't move first, next time it won't be a bullet in a tree." For the first time since I'd come here, the mansion no longer felt like a refuge. It was a front line. And Dominic, he was no longer the quiet strategist who had hidden behind calm restraint. He had become what he truly was, a man built for war. And I, unwillingly, had become the reason the war began. He woke me close to 3 in the morning, his voice a low blade slicing through the remnants of sleep. "We have to leave, now." I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. The look in his eyes said enough. The nightmare we'd feared was no longer a threat. It was here. I dressed quickly, packing my laptop, hard drives, everything that mattered into the backpack he had ready. Vincent was waiting downstairs, armed and alert, eyes scanning the shadows as if every rustling leaf might be a trap. Dominic didn't explain, but from the glance he exchanged with Vincent, I knew someone had breached the internal system. There was no time to analyze, no time to prepare. He pulled a hidden lever behind the library shelves, revealing a narrow passage that led into a cold, unlit tunnel. A small shoulder-mounted flashlight guided our way through the damp air until we emerged behind the forest, where another vehicle waited beneath a canopy of trees. Dominic took the driver's seat. Vincent followed in another car a few hundred meters behind, silent as a shadow. We drove without headlights, using only the faint glow needed to avoid the obstacles ahead. For over an hour, I said nothing. The wind hissed past the windows, and I realized I was leaving behind the only place that had felt remotely safe since the night I almost drowned. Yet I didn't feel grief, only the quiet certainty that nothing would ever return to what it was. At last, Dominic stopped near a wooden cabin hidden deep within the southern forest. No other homes existed for miles. He turned off the engine and faced me, his eyes slow and deliberate, as if memorizing every line of my face in the dark. His voice dropped to a whisper, fragile but steady. "Emily, if you take one more step, there's no going back, no safety, no old life." "I know," I said, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Dominic studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward until his forehead rested lightly against mine. He didn't kiss me, not yet. He just stayed there, close enough for our breaths to touch, close enough for him to hear the rhythm of my heart. His voice came barely above a breath. "I tried to stop this. I shouldn't care about you this much. But every day you fought back, every time you defied me just to stand your ground, I realized I couldn't keep myself separate from your world anymore." I didn't answer with words. I lifted my hand to his cheek and drew him closer. The first kiss wasn't rushed. It was the slow collision of 2 storms held back too long, a blend of silence, fear, and the kind of trust built on truth and blood. When he finally pulled away, I saw something break loose in his eyes, like a man who had kept too many secrets for too many years. Dominic squeezed my hand once, firmly, then turned to check his weapons. "We can't hide forever," he said. "But tonight, we still have time. Tomorrow will be different." I nodded. That night, inside the small cabin buried deep in the forest, there were no gunshots, no shadows watching from the trees, only 2 heartbeats, steady and entwined in the dark. And for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel alone. And Dominic no longer had to fight his war alone either. The alarm cut through the night like a blade, sharp and sudden, slicing through the silence before I could even open my eyes. I jolted upright, heart pounding so hard it caught in my throat. The cabin was pitch dark except for the red light flashing from the security console above the fireplace. Dominic was already on his feet. In one swift motion, he crossed the room, pulled up a hatch in the floor, and yanked out a metal case. The lock snapped open with the speed of muscle memory. Inside were 2 handguns, a scoped rifle, and rows of neatly stacked ammunition. He handed me a gun, his voice low but steady, the kind of tone meant to cut through chaos. Like we practiced. You know what to do. I nodded, hands trembling slightly as I gripped the weapon. Dominic checked his own magazine, then took a small handheld device from the coat draped over the chair and tapped in a sequence. A map flickered to life on its small screen, 3 red dots moving in from the perimeter toward the center. 3 vehicles, he muttered. At least 6 men. They're closing in. A chill shot down my spine. The cartel. They had found us. Dominic's eyes were all focus now, stripped of every trace of softness. He called Vincent over the radio, his tone clipped. Positions. Already in place, came Vincent's reply, calm, metallic. Dominic motioned for me to follow. We slipped out the back of the cabin, cutting across the fog-soaked clearing toward a hidden bunker buried beneath an old tool shed. Every step felt measured, every breath controlled, the air thick with anticipation. The moment we sealed the hatch behind us, the first gunshot cracked through the night, loud, concussive, shaking the ground. I dropped instinctively, my ears ringing. Dominic pulled me behind a concrete barrier, his hand pressing my shoulder. Steady your breathing. Remember what we practiced. They won't breach if we hold position. I forced a nod. Above us, the firefight intensified, glass shattering, doors splintering, boots pounding against the floorboards. Dominic flipped open the surveillance screen. 4 grainy feeds showed at least 8 armed men, splitting into 2 groups, one storming the cabin, the other circling the shed. On the west camera, Vincent moved like a ghost, dropping 2 attackers with precise, silent shots. Dominic adjusted his shoulder strap and turned to me once more. Stay here. I'll back up, Vincent. Hold the bunker. If anyone gets through, you know what to do. I caught his hand before he turned away. No, not this time. I'm not hiding underground while you fight out there. I may not shoot like you, but I can protect what matters. He hesitated, eyes locked on mine, then nodded. No protest. He handed me an earpiece, fitted it gently, and led me up a secondary shaft. We split, he and Vincent flanking right toward the densest gunfire, while I took the small control room that overlooked the northern approach. Within minutes, the battle unfolded in full. Gunfire echoed through the forest, flashes slicing the darkness, the scent of gunpowder filling the air. When a man in body armor tried breaking through my window, I fired twice. I didn't know if I hit him, only that he fell and that I was still breathing. Over the radio, Vincent's voice came through, 2 down, west side clear. Dominic's reply was rough, his breath strained. Pull back, tighten perimeter. Then an explosion ripped through the night. The main feed blinked out. The cabin camera went black. Dominic! I shouted into the mic. No response. Dominic, answer me. Silence. My pulse roared in my ears. I wasn't the woman behind a lens anymore. I wasn't the quiet observer of the world's chaos. I was standing in it, gun in hand, heart pounding, and everything I loved was burning somewhere above ground. I couldn't stay hidden. Not when Dominic might be out there. I ran for the bunker's exit, but before I could reach it, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor, a woman with her hair tied back, eyes sharp as glass. Lucia. I had seen her before at the mansion, always silent, always watching. Dominic trusted her completely. I never asked why. Now she was here, an MP5 slung across her chest, her face streaked with smoke and sweat. She met my eyes, gave a single nod. No words were needed. Dominic must have called her in long before this night. I spun back to the control console, activating the motion sensors for Tunnel 2, the one Dominic and I had never used. Lights blinked, movement detected. They were breaching through the secondary entrance under the second shed. Lucia's voice cut through the static. Do you know how to use C4? I shook my head. You won't need to. Just buy me 60 seconds. And then she was gone, swift, silent, lethal. I tightened my grip on the gun, standing guard by the steel door. The faint scrape of metal echoed from the other side. I fired once, a warning shot. The sound ricocheted through the bunker, then silence again. On the remaining thermal feed, I counted 2, 3, 4, 5 heat signatures near the fuel bay. If they breached that corridor, our backup power would go down. I found the auxiliary controls and rerouted the energy circuits, locking the pressure valves from inside. My hands trembled, but my mind stayed clear. Every second mattered. Then an explosion. The shockwave rocked the floor. A burst of white light flared across the screens before they steadied again. The secondary tunnel had collapsed. Lucia reappeared, her clothes streaked with soot, blood trickling from her arm. She dropped beside me, wrapped a strip of gauze around the wound without flinching. I stared at her in awe, this quiet, relentless woman who would walk straight into fire without hesitation. "They're not done," she rasped. "There's another group by the emergency exit." I froze. That exit used a passcode one only Dominic and I knew. I rushed to the main console and entered the sequence. "Error. Tried again. Error. They've hijacked the signal," Lucia muttered. "If they decrypt it, this bunker becomes a tomb." Panic pressed at the edge of my thoughts. There had to be another way. Then I remembered the schematic Dominic once drew, an internal junction, where the power grid could be shut off manually, forcing the system into local control. But it was beyond Hall A, where the last feed had shown 3 armed men trying to break through. I turned to Lucia. "I need cover. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, seal Corridor D. Don't let them reach the data core." She nodded once, no argument. I grabbed my flashlight and pistol and darted through the narrow passage. The metallic tang of smoke filled my lungs. Every flicker of light seemed too bright, every sound too near. When I reached the junction room, 2 men were crouched over the control panel. I didn't think I fired. One dropped instantly. The other spun around, gun raised, but I lunged forward, ramming my shoulder into him, slamming my hand down on the red lever. The lights went out. Total darkness. The hum of electricity died. For one heartbeat, I thought I'd made a fatal mistake until a shot cracked behind me. Lucia. The last attacker collapsed at my feet. When my knees gave out, my hand was still wrapped around the emergency lever. Lucia crouched beside me, her expression unreadable, but her voice carried a rare warmth. "Good work." And in that moment, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the woman who needed protection. I had crossed the line into the world Dominic lived in, the world of action, of choices, of survival, and I had done it not just for him, but for myself. Smoke still lingered in the air as Lucia and I left the comms room, every step we took crunching over shattered glass and empty shell casings that rang out against the metal corridor like distant echoes of violence. The smell of gunpowder and burnt ash clung to the air, heavy and acrid, making my stomach twist, but I didn't stop. My heart raced, not from fear, but from one consuming thought: I still hadn't seen Dominic. I couldn't breathe until I did. We crossed the West Passage and turned toward the main control room. Vincent was already there, his coat streaked with blood, the barrel of his gun still raised, though his eyes softened the moment he saw us. He gestured toward a door left slightly ajar. "In there!" I ran before I could think. Dominic was sitting against the wall, his left hand gripping his right shoulder, the fabric of his shirt torn and dark with blood, but his eyes were open, steady, and fiercely alive. When he saw me, he exhaled with a relief so raw it broke something inside me. I fell to my knees beside him and took his uninjured hand in both of mine. Dominic smiled a tired, pained smile, but still his. "It's all right," he murmured. "The bullet just grazed me. Vincent took care of the last one before he could fire again." I tightened my grip as if letting go even for a moment would make the world collapse. Dominic lifted his hand, brushed soot and a smear of blood from the small cut on my forehead, his touch trembling yet tender. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You did what no one could have imagined. You didn't just survive, Emily. You fought. You held this place." And then I broke. Tears came, hot and unstoppable. Not out of fear, but because for the first time I allowed myself to feel everything we had endured. I had thought I'd lost him. Dominic's good arm wrapped around me, pulling me close despite the blood seeping through his bandage. He let me cry against his shoulder, let himself finally breathe after days wound tight as wire. Vincent and Lucia slipped quietly out of the room, leaving us in a silence so complete it felt sacred. I felt Dominic's heartbeat, steady and strong, his breath warm against my neck, a wordless reassurance that he was here, alive, and still mine. He held me tighter, his voice rough but steady. "I thought about leaving you to keep you safe. But tonight, watching you fight, watching you code, Shoot, and stand your ground. I realized you don't need to be hidden. You need to be trusted. You made me believe again. I looked up into the dark brown eyes I'd once seen as cold as steel, and for the first time they glowed with a gentleness words couldn't touch. Dominic, I whispered, I'm no hero. I did all this because I couldn't bear to lose you. He smiled faintly and rested his forehead against mine. Then we're the same. I fought because of you. And now that it's over, even if only for now, there's one thing I need you to know. I love you, Emily. I'm done living in the shadows. I want to step into the light with you. I nodded, tears still falling. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other amid the wreckage still warm from battle, surrounded by cracked walls and the lingering scent of smoke. No more words were needed. Just the rhythm of our breathing, our hearts aligned, the quiet knowing that for one fleeting moment, every fear, every loss, every scar was behind us. In his arms, for the first time, I felt truly safe, not because of where we were, but because of who I was holding. Dominic, with all his scars and shadows, had become the only home I wanted to return to. 3 days after the attack, Dominic stood inside a hidden meeting room deep beneath an old building in Chicago, a place no one would ever suspect, and no outsider was allowed to enter. There, 5 men sat around a massive oak table, each representing one of the most powerful families that had ever ruled the underworld of the eastern and southern United States. Behind them stood guards in dark suits, hands resting on the concealed weapons under their jackets. The room was silent when Dominic entered, striding down the steel-cold corridor, his black shirt sleeves rolled up, the bandage on his shoulder still fresh but his eyes unwavering. He placed a thick folder on the table, his voice calm, deep, and deliberate. This is the proof. The names, the money flow, the weapons, the personnel. Velasquez's network has not only breached the southern border, it's infiltrated the northern strongholds once thought untouchable. They're already in New York, Boston, Philadelphia. This isn't just smuggling. They're buying lawyers, police, judges. An older man at the head of the table spoke, his voice heavy with an Italian accent, cold and slow. Dominic, you withdrew. You swore never to return. We respected that. But if you're here to drag us into a war without end, you'll need more than papers to convince us. Dominic didn't back down. He opened the file and projected images onto the wall behind him. Faces from that night, footage from the FBI raids, encrypted financial records now decoded. He didn't have to say another word. They saw it all, the empire they once controlled now being eaten from within by a power that answered to no one. Dominic's gaze swept the room. They tried to kill me. They tried to kill the woman I love. They fear no law, no boundary. And if you think you can stay out of this and survive, you're already dead. Another man leaned back, arms crossed, his tone gravelly. What do you want? Dominic took a step forward, his voice as solid as stone. I want consensus. Total eradication of Velasquez. The money lines, the transport routes, the heads of command. No deals, no negotiations. One of the elders nodded slowly. Do you have a plan? Dominic turned, pressed a button, and the screen filled with maps, smuggling corridors, shipping routes, warehouse coordinates, and the movement patterns of the top lieutenants he had been tracking for months. Vincent had overseen every location. Lucia had identified structural weaknesses. Emily's photographs had revealed connections no one else could see. Together, they had built a counter-network not from a single family, but from people willing to risk everything for the truth. Dominic's voice softened, but every word struck like a bell. This isn't a war for power. It's survival. It's protecting the world we still have from the thing that's trying to consume it. If we don't act now, tomorrow there won't be anyone left who can. The room fell silent. The men who once bowed to no one looked at each other. Then, one by one, nodded. No vows, no oaths. Just a single gesture, but enough to set off an earthquake that would ripple through every shadowed corner of the map. Dominic didn't smile. He only closed his eyes for a heartbeat, exhaling the weight he'd carried for too long. And when he opened them again, the war had already begun. The sky had not yet turned fully light when the convoy entered the southern warehouse district of El Paso, a place once used for cross-border shipping, now transformed into the hidden command base of the Velasquez cartel. Dominic sat inside an armored vehicle, a pistol resting on his thigh, eyes fixed ahead and unblinking. Beside him, Vincent checked the operation map one last time, while Lucia synced her headset with the support teams already lying in ambush from 3 different directions. Everything had been planned to the second, to the meter, to the bullet, but Dominic knew there was no such thing as a perfect plan. Not when the man he was about to face was Miguel Velasquez, the infamous kingpin who had survived 3 assassination attempts, destroyed 2 major families, and left 5 FBI agents dead. Dominic had not told Emily the exact time or place of the assault. He had left her somewhere safe, with Lucia as her final line of protection. He knew that if he failed, she would never forgive him, but if he brought her along, he might lose more than his life. The order to strike came at 5:17 a.m. The strike force, an alliance of 4 families combined with Dominic's inner circle, swept into the compound from every side, pressure closing in like a tightening fist. Bullets hissed through the air. Explosions rolled across the space like the war drums of hell. Dominic led the western advance, kicked through a metal door, and dropped 2 guards in an instant. Every shot was cold, deliberate, merciless. Blood splattered walls and floors and the side of his face. But he never slowed. Through the bulletproof glass of the command office, he saw Miguel standing there, still wearing gloves, barking orders into his radio as if death were a rumor that belonged to someone else. Dominic knew the man would not run. Miguel Velasquez would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. Dominic charged up the second-floor stairs, rolled through a hallway to dodge the crossfire of 2 snipers, and returned with a single chest shot that silenced them both. The air was thick with smoke and blood. When he burst through the command room door, Miguel had already turned, gun raised, aimed squarely at Dominic's chest. Neither spoke. There were no threats left, no words, only eyes' hatred, and the long history of blood between them. Dominic fired first. His bullet tore through Miguel's left shoulder, but the man stayed upright and fired back. Dominic dodged the first round, but the second hit deep in his abdomen. He staggered but did not fall. In that brief moment, as Miguel stepped forward to finish it, Dominic drew his backup gun from the holster at his ankle and fired once more, straight through the center of Miguel's forehead. The kingpin crumpled, eyes wide open, frozen mid-defiance. Dominic stood over him, blood seeping through his shirt, one hand gripping the console to keep his balance. Vincent and 2 others rushed in, catching him before he collapsed. The room still reeked of hot steel and gunpowder, but at its center lay the undeniable proof that Miguel Velasquez's empire had finally fallen. Dominic was carried out between 2 lines of silent men. No one cheered. There was only respect and gratitude in their eyes. He gasped for breath, clutching Vincent's coat, blood still spilling fast, but his gaze searched for one thing only: Emily. Vincent gave a small nod. She's safe. Dominic tried to smile, then his eyes closed, not in despair, but because his body could fight no more. As the helicopter lifted off to take him to the nearest hospital, dawn broke over the eastern horizon. The battle was over. Blood had been spilled. But for the first time in years, the sunrise touched Dominic's face without finding a man hiding from it. He had fought. He had paid the price. And he had kept his final promise to the woman he loved. Whether he lived or died, he had not turned away. The hospital room was so quiet I could hear every tick of the wall clock. Morning light slipped through the blinds, casting a soft glow over Dominic's face as he slept. His skin was pale from blood loss, yet the unyielding lines of his expression remained. I sat beside him, holding his hand, and had not let go since the surgeons finished the long hours that saved the man I loved alive, breathing, still here. When he opened his eyes, the deep brown pupils I knew so well slowly regained their focus, and I broke down in tears. He said nothing at first, only lifted his hand to touch my cheek where the tears still clung. I smiled through the trembling, whispering as if my voice might hurt him. "I'm here." Dominic tried to smile back, barely managing to lift one corner of his mouth. His voice was hoarse, thin, but still vibrant with life. "I know. I called your name. I don't know if anyone heard me, but I thought, if I didn't wake up this time, the last face I wanted to see was yours." I leaned in and pressed my lips gently to his forehead. "You're not going anywhere. I won't let you." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his gaze deep and warm like fire in the dark. "I'm tired, Emily. Not from the wound, from the years I spent living in the shadows. If you still want me, if you're still here, I'll give it all up. The old world, the power, every blood oath that ever bound me. All I want is a home, the woman I love, and mornings that don't begin with a gun in my hand." I looked at him, my heart breaking and mending all at once. I don't need you perfect. I just need you alive. I need you to be you, the man who saved me, who fought for truth, for justice, and for us. Dominic squeezed my hand, weak but firm enough to tell me he wouldn't let go. Then we start over, don't we? A new life. I nodded, resting my forehead against his shoulder, where the bandage was still warm. Yes, a new life. No more cartel, no more shadows, just us. And for the first time, I believed it. It wasn't a promise made in the haze of survival, it was a vow paid for in blood, sacrifice, and courage by two people once swallowed by the dark, who now chose, together, to step beyond it. 2 years later, on a crisp October afternoon in New York, Emily stood at the center of a spacious photography exhibition in Soho, surrounded by white walls hung with large matte prints, each one a fragment of memory, survival, and rediscovered faith. The collection, titled Between the Shadows, was not only her first major work since stepping away from photography, but also a quiet, resolute testimony to everything she had lived through. The room was filled with people, journalists, friends, art critics, and photography lovers, each gazing at the frames in respectful silence. Yet Emily searched for only one familiar pair of eyes, and then she saw him. Dominic entered without noise or fanfare, wearing a simple gray suit, his brown eyes no longer sharp and severe as they once were, but calm and reflective, like a windless lake. He no longer needed to hide. Since the day he awoke in that hospital, Dominic had kept his promise. He severed every remaining tie to the underworld, sold off his stake in shadowed investments, passed his power to a successor, and disappeared from the radar of anyone who had once known the name Dominic Callahan as a symbol of fear and authority. He moved with Emily to a small house on the outskirts of Portland, where no one asked about the past, where the only concerns were what you planted in your garden today and whether it might rain tomorrow. Dominic learned to live slowly, mending fences, cooking dinner from Emily's mother's old handwritten recipes, and brewing coffee every morning before she woke. They lived as though life had never been broken, as though two halves of a shattered past could indeed be bound together by the faith of the present. When the exhibition neared its end, Emily led Dominic along the final row of photographs, stopping before one that showed the burned bunker, a patch of wall mottled with light, and at its center, Dominic's coat draped over an old wooden chair. He paused for a long moment before the image. Emily looked at him and whispered softly, "I kept it, to remind myself that even in the darkest places, someone chose to stay because of love." Dominic turned toward her, his eyes filled with gratitude and pride. "You turned it into art. No one sees blood or fear in these photos, only life." Emily smiled gently, "Because that's all that remains in the end." As the guests began to leave, Dominic quietly took her hand amid the dimmed lights and the soft echo of footsteps fading away. His voice came low, meant only for her. "I'm no longer a man of the old world, but I still love you the way I did that first night in the cabin, in the heart of the forest." Emily rested her head against his shoulder, her gaze lifting to the final photograph, two hands intertwined in a soft, hazy glow, as if every pain they had endured was merely the backdrop for what was most beautiful and true. They no longer needed to run, no longer needed to explain. Life, in its mysterious mercy, had given them another chance, and this time, they held onto it with both hands, without hesitation. The autumn light spread gold across the wooden bridge, spanning the small stream behind their home, the same spot where Emily had first set up her camera after the storm of their past had calmed. The sun bathed the trees in shades of amber and rust, and the gentle breeze sent leaves fluttering like rain. Dominic stood beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, their small dog sitting by their feet, and before them, the camera timer counted down, the lens aimed toward them, and the baby cooing happily in Emily's arms. Click. The shutter's soft sound carried the weight of everything it meant. That photograph would later become the closing piece in Emily's newest collection, not for any gallery, but simply to preserve a single moment, a quiet family rebuilt from ruin. She glanced at the camera screen, then lifted her gaze toward the bridge, the scene before her pulling her gently back through all they had survived. That fateful rainy night, when a strange car followed her and sent her plunging into an icy river. The first moment she saw Dominic, the man who stepped out of the darkness and pulled her back from death. The days of hiding, the chases, the gunfire, the long nights filled with doubt. And finally the night they held each other in that dark room, choosing not to give up, not to turn back, and not to let the shadows define who they were. It all replayed like a slow film in her mind, not as a haunting, but as gratitude, because without those moments of despair, she might never have learned what it truly meant to love, to trust, or to live. From a wandering photographer with an old camera and a broken past, she had become a woman with a family, with love, and, above all, a reason to wake each morning with a smile. Dominic lifted their child high, making the little one laugh gleefully in the golden light. Emily raised her hand to shield her eyes, but her smile could not be hidden. She knew this journey was far from perfect, filled with trials, at times nearly hopeless, but that was what made it precious. Because what matters most is not where we begin, but how we find the courage to walk through the darkness, to reach the light. And if you're watching this video, ask yourself one question. If you were Emily, if one day you were pushed into the freezing river, who would reach for your hand? And would you have the courage to trust, to forgive, to begin again? Today's story is not merely a love tale between darkness and light. It is a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from what we thought was lost. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video with those you care about. And please, leave a comment below. Tell us how Emily and Dominic's journey made you feel. Did it remind you of something in your own life? We would love to hear your thoughts, straight from the heart. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. We'll see you again in our next story filled with emotion, meaning, and humanity. Wishing everyone watching this a good life, steady health, joy in every day, and peace in every moment. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.